Alrighty, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the first episode of the Let's Clarify YouTube series. I'll kind of flesh that out as we go, but I just kind of wanted to start this and hop on here basically just to address some misconceptions kind of throughout. I've always been fascinated with the myth-busting side of things. I've always been fascinated with just kind of figuring out what the misinformation side of stuff is. And being able to ask the question why and always dive a little bit deeper and figure out why we do the things that we do. But also as I've gotten more involved in the fitness industry and reading and following certain people and seeing what they think about other certain people and their beliefs and kind of what the research says and all of that, I've just become fascinated with how much garbage is kind of put out there and what other fitness influencers, whatever that looks like, what they kind of use to push their products, push their agenda, whatever that looks like as well. And so one that more recently has kind of come up and crossed paths with my business partner and friend Angela. She posted a TikTok video about protein intake and kind of got some backlash. Some from registered dietitians or say they're registered dietitians, some from not. I'm a big supporter of registered dietitians. I minored in dietetics. And I think that plays a huge role in knowing exactly how the body breaks down certain macronutrients and just all of its processes and what food does, et cetera, et cetera. I think it plays a huge role. And we were taught pretty early on, if you're not a registered dietitian, then to be skeptical. Anybody can go and get a nutrition certification and not necessarily have the knowledge to back it up. And then there's plenty that do have the knowledge to back it up, but with a registered dietitian, you know that you're getting that 4 years of schooling, like that is their degree. And so it carries a lot of weight. But there's registered dietitians who aren't really in the fitness community. They're in a realm of just supporting or helping with your local health, people that aren't necessarily working out, aren't necessarily trying to build muscle. It's just the general population. That was the word I was looking for. They work a lot with the general population. And so the numbers and things like that are a little bit different. So obviously most of the people that I help with, that Angela helps with, that we work with, are people that are either trying to build muscle or losing fat, things like that. So the numbers are much different than what you would read in a textbook. 2 palms of protein a day is not going to cut it and is not adequate. It's not even necessarily an optimal number at that point. It's a deficient number. And so I just want to take the time to kind of go through what exactly protein is, what it does, what it helps, and then kind of what the myths are and to kind of revolve around that entire topic. So yeah, let's dive right in. All right, so the first thing we kind of want to dive into here is just what protein is and what the role of protein is. Obviously, from a health and fitness perspective, you've got muscle recovery, you've got muscle building, you have, from a nutrition standpoint, it helps with snacking, it helps with your hunger, it's more filling than other macronutrients. From a fat loss perspective, it's also much more thermogenic, so whenever you eat food, that accounts for about 10% of the calories you burn in a day. Just from digesting, from using those nutrients and things like that. So protein is more thermogenic than your carbs and fats are. And so making sure that having that elevated protein, any studies you see when it's trying to figure out basically if carbs or fats are better, if one's better than the other, keto versus non, et cetera, all of the forever debate between carbs and fats. Every study that's ever done between the two, they always have calories equated, so calories are the same, and protein equated, so protein's the same. When those two factors are the same, then it's really personal preference after that. Fats have a little bit more of a lower threshold, a bare minimum, if you will, of just, hey, you need to have this minimum amount of fats just to make sure your hormones are working properly and producing properly. But besides that, it's pretty much a personal preference game at that point. But so from a health fitness perspective, that's kind of what protein does. And where it's most, where all the focus kind of is. And it has a lot more benefits as well, with making sure that your bones and things are strong, carrying out chemical processes in the body, communicating between your muscles and organs and tissues, and all within the cell, things like that. So that's kind of like the roles of protein. So even in knowing all of these certain aspects of protein and stuff, the big question is always just how much protein do you need? How much protein is enough? How much protein is too much? What's too little? How does it fluctuate between person to person, lifestyle to lifestyle? What's that magic number, magic formula even for figuring out what that protein is? And so we're going to dive into that right now. All right, so probably should have clarified this on the front end. Let's clarify. I probably should have addressed this on the front end. My handwriting is nothing to write home about, so I apologize in advance if you can't read it or see it. So I will do my best to explain as I go. So obviously, as you can see, a ton of different formulas. This does not even really account for even some of the more in-depth formulas, and so a lot of those come from even just calculating your calories in general. There's a million different calculators and things out there. We'll get into all of that in a different video if y'all show interest in this one. But it's something that once you have your calories figured out, protein's always the first one you address. You've got your number. So let's say for me, we'll say like even 3,000 calories is usually what I can eat and still be in a deficit and have that slow, steady fat loss and still maintain as much lean body mass as I can. And so really where it comes somewhat, a lot of the discrepancies and things like that start to show up is the how much protein do you need and what's the easiest to calculate. So usually a big rule of thumb, the number that everybody just kind of came up with and kind of throw out is the 1 gram per pound of body weight. So now for a lot of people, whether they're just starting out, like that's not the worst thing in the world. Most people, that 1 gram per pound of body weight is going to be more than they need. And we'll get into the more than they need. We'll dive into that towards the end of this video, just as one of the myth side of things of what happens to the excess protein, et cetera, et cetera. But the 1 gram per pound of body weight is not a bad rule of thumb. Now, where it kind of obviously has an upper limit is if you're 400 pounds and you're in that obese category, obviously 400 grams of protein is much farther away from what you need. Not to mention it's not sustainable. Nobody's going to be able to eat 400 grams of protein. Your professional bodybuilders are not eating 400 grams of protein. So even from that perspective, you don't have to worry about that 1 gram per pound of body weight. But where it is easy to just shoot for that is because every other thing you'll see up here other than what I have starred here, which is my preference, everything else is going to be contingent on your lean body mass. And so that's where it gets tough, is because most people don't have access to the hundreds and hundreds of dollars, the equipment where you can submerge yourself in water and really the hydro or whatever that really allows you to figure out what your true body fat percentage is and things like that. You've got machines that can kind of help you get in a ballpark, but even those machines, if you've had too much water that morning, if you've had a protein shake, if you've already worked out, so many things affect how your water and things like that are distributed, the inflammation in your muscles, all that plays a role. And so as these machines are sensing you and sending micropulses, whatever they're marketing, the numbers can be pretty far off. And so that's where it kind of gets tough. I mean, again, you can, even a broken scale, if you're using it consistently, it's still going to move how it needs to. So you can still track intervals and stuff, even if you're off a little bit. You can still use those machines. They're better than nothing, better than assuming you're at 10% body fat when you're at like 25. So they're better than nothing. But so 1 gram per pound of body weight, not a bad thing, but there are definitely certain people in certain populations where that just becomes a little bit of overkill. It becomes harder to sustain the heavier you are. And on top of that, if you've never tracked your protein before, if you're used to having 90 grams of protein a day, but you weigh 220 pounds, that's a big jump. You've got to also make sure your water intake's good, your fiber intake is good. Too much protein, especially all at once, if you're doing it in large chunks, can cause some digestional stress, things like that, just from having to break it down. So usually not my preference. It's not bad, but it can get you started. But I would usually go one step further, which is the 1 gram per pound of lean body mass. Again, much more accurate number. That's usually like rule of thumb. Like if you know exactly that you're 177 grams of or 177 pounds of lean body mass, that 1 gram would work just fine. And that would be my preference. And that's really what a lot of the studies say is a gram per pound of lean body mass. It's just tougher to calculate, which brings me to the 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for me, I'm at like 240 right now, 240 pounds, which comes to about 109 kilograms. So times 2 is usually easy. So 218 grams of protein a day. So I'll round that up to 220, and that's basically my protein intake. So the leaner you are, your protein goes up. the heavier you are, the protein goes down, just because you have the heavier you are, the higher your body fat percentage is, the more fat stores you have to pull from. They can keep you from losing that lean body mass. As you get leaner, you're sub 10% body fat, you got very little body fat, very little excess stores to pull from. Then that's when the protein goes up, just to hold on to that last little bit, hold on to as much lean body mass as you can. So this chart down here is actually in Lane Norton's Fat Loss Forever book. He's one of my favorites in the industry. He's done plenty of research. His PhD is in muscle protein synthesis, I believe, which we'll cover in a little bit in this video. But this chart is in his book, and basically, as you get older, the formula, the amount of protein that you need goes up per your lean body mass. So this is kind of where it gets tricky too, because you're like, wow, if you're 61 to 70 and you're having 3 grams per kilogram of lean body mass of protein, that's a lot. But as you get older, your lean body mass goes down. So really, there's not as much fluctuation. Then you got a no deficit and a deficit category. So again, when you're not in a deficit, those numbers are lower. So you don't have to focus as much on the protein when you have so many calories coming from carbs and fats to kind of minimize that muscle loss. You just focus on the protein for the recovery side of things, building new muscle, et cetera, et cetera. That surplus type situation where you have a lot of food to pull from. So even in a bulking state, everybody's like, oh, I'm bulking, I've got to up my protein. It's actually the opposite. The protein becomes a lot more important when you're in that deficit and you don't have those extra stores. When you're bulking, you got plenty of extra calories to pull from. So that's when the protein number can be more on the less optimal end and focus on the carbs and fats, because they play a bigger role in being able to put on some size. So yeah, next we're going to cover some of those myth busting side of things. All right, I know for a fact I wrote this too small, but I don't want to rewrite it. So we'll go through it. So this is my favorite part, because this is all the myth busting side of things. This is the, hey, here's what media, people that are in power, whatever, here's what they push pretty hard, and this is what I like to push back on, and kind of ruffle some feathers, and things like that. But also just to clarify for all of you watching, a lot of you are new to the fitness space or have heard 10 different things and have no idea. And so that's where I enjoy coming in and kind of, usually it's just playing the middle ground. Usually there's some truths in this camp, there's some truths in this camp, but they both are like opposites, and it can't be in a both and type situation, when in most cases it can. And so that's where I like to come in and keep the peace, but also it ruffles the feathers of both camps. And so that's always fun for me. Hypertrophy coach, his name is Joe Bennett, is always one of the, he's become one of my favorites here in the past 6 to 7 months, I guess. Been watching a lot of his videos, reading a lot of his stuff, and he's very much where I've gotten a lot of my beliefs in, just support the train of thought of just kind of whatever's sustainable for you. I talk about it a lot on the podcast. I talk about it a lot with my clients. So much of what I've learned just in the past year, what's optimal isn't always necessarily sustainable. And so that it being optimal doesn't matter anymore if you can't stick to it and you can't follow it. So that's a big part of what I like to cover and what I like to myth bust about. So big misconception number one is obviously just that protein being too high. You see these like 200 plus numbers and people like to freak out. Some female clients that are used to, having 60, 70 grams of protein a day, and now I'm prescribing them 120 to 130, grams of protein a day. And they're like, no, like there's no way, like isn't this bad for me? I've heard that it's bad for kidneys, things like that. The kidney discussion I can have a whole video on, but for starters, that's the kidney's job, is to filter out and to do that sort of thing. And so for people to think that having high protein, unless you have some sort of pre-existing condition, things like that, you can't say any all-encompassing statements, because everybody's different, everybody's going to respond differently, which is why adjusting your protein, if you are eating 120 grams of protein, you have digestion issues and things like that, then trial and error, take some protein away, play with your numbers and things like that. That's obviously the benefit of having a coach come in and make those adjustments and stuff for you. I can look at your food chart and I can look at kind of like what the track record has been, what you're eating on certain days. Is it actually the protein, or are you eating processed garbage? There's a lot of different factors that go into what can be causing digestion issues. But overall, the protein too high argument is usually not for the reasons that people like to talk about. If anything, what becomes most dangerous to your progress is just the lack of sustainability. I know people that would go to the gym and are eating 300 grams of protein a day and drinking a gallon of aminos and just super, super overkill, which, by the way, your body breaks protein down into aminos. So if you're getting adequate protein, then aminos are pretty much pointless. So you don't even have to worry about getting anything like that. But that's just kind of the bro science side of things. So let's just a gram of protein per pound of body weight. It's easy to calculate, and we'll just chug aminos all the time. And there's no way we're ever going to lose our muscle mass. So there's a lot more that goes into it, and most of the time, none of that's really in the realm of possibility, really in the realm of what's probably going to happen. If you're eating plenty of protein, then you don't have to waste your money on those types of supplements. Second is you can't digest that much. So this is one of my favorite myths to kind of bust, or to really at least just kind of clarify. That's what I hear the most, and even friends, clients, things like that kind of thing. It's like, hey, like I'm, eating a Greek yogurt, which is 12 grams of protein, and then I'm drinking my 25-gram protein shake, and Joe over here is saying that I can't digest that much. Like, is that true? And so what most people think that when you're eating that much protein is that you can't digest that much, which is not the case. Your body is smarter than that. It's not hey, once you hit 25 grams or more, your body just pees out the excess because it can't process that much. Your body's always going to use what it needs and then use the rest later, convert it. It's going to always use what is there. But what they either most likely mean or now are going to know what they mean is what's called muscle protein synthesis. And so this is the trigger that tells your body that, hey, we need to repair muscle. Hey, we need to build new muscle. This is when that act of, hey, let's make progress. Let's put that protein, the leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Those are your three amino acids that are best for triggering mTOR, building muscle, blah, 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 bunch of fancy nerdy stuff. But basically those are the three amino acids that trigger building muscle and recovery and that sort of thing. So muscle protein synthesis spikes at a few different things. One obviously is going to be your workouts, your resistance training. That's when you're going to have probably your largest, not probably, you are going to have your largest muscle protein synthesis spike post-workout. That's where kind of the anabolic window comes in. That's where the myth of you've got to have a protein shake within 30 minutes of post-workout. Really, you've got like a 5 to 6 hour window from when you had your pre-workout meal to when you finished working out to getting your post-workout meal. So I talked about this a little on the podcast. So if you ate your pre-workout meal, waited an hour, worked out for an hour, so 2 hours have now passed. So you have 3 to 4 hours to get in your post-workout meal, shake, etc. in before you kind of lose that window of optimal. You're not going to lose your gains if you don't get in that amount of time, but if you want what's optimal and it fits into your schedule, then that's kind of your window. Carrying a protein shake with you and getting it in 30 minutes, post-workout, and it's not a bad thing, but it's not hey, you don't get your gains if you don't get it in right afterwards. That anabolic window is really more like an anabolic door where that heightened muscle protein synthesis really lasts more of a 24 to 36 hours, maybe even like 18. That 36 is a real upper limit for a lot of people. So I'd even err on the side of 18 to 24 hours. That's why that push-pull leg split has become so popular. It's because you hit, chest, your push day on like Monday. It's heightened for, Tuesday and a little bit into Wednesday. So by the time you're fully recovered and your muscle protein synthesis has reduced for those body parts, then you're hitting it again on Thursday and it kind of spikes it back up. So it kind of keeps a little more universal response to those muscles. It's been a little debunked and adjusted since then, but that's why it gained such popularity. Hitting everything 2 to 3 times a week, your body can handle it and gets optimal results. Now, metabolic window we've covered, so muscle protein synthesis, that's kind of where the protein side of things that comes into play. So with muscle protein synthesis, every time you eat protein, your muscle protein synthesis spikes. So where those people that, you can't digest 100 grams of protein at once, one, yes you can, but two, the spike in muscle protein synthesis is what's going to decay. So instead of having, if there's your line and you have, you eat 100 grams of, or let's just say small meals throughout the day of 25 to 30 grams of protein. And so you've got these little spikes here throughout the day. What doesn't happen when you have, let's say 3 meals of 100 grams, it's not this. It's going to still be this, but just much more infrequent. And so that's where there's no real benefit from a muscle protein synthesis standpoint, or really any benefit at all, to have 100 grams all at once versus 25 grams spread out throughout the day. Usually the 25 to 30, the upper limit of that's kind of like the 50 grams of protein is kind of how much is going to have a muscle protein synthesis benefit. But overall, usually staying in that 30 to 40 grams, spreading it throughout the day. So whether that's a Greek yogurt and some eggs or whatever and toast for breakfast, then maybe you have a shake, and then you go work out and you have like your post-workout meal, and then you have dinner later on, and then a post-workout and then a shake before bed. So having like 5 to 6 meals throughout the day, as your schedule allows, carrying protein bars that have 20 to 25 grams in them. I do the Fairlife pre-made protein shakes that are 30 grams, so one in the morning, one before bed, and I have a post-workout meal in there, and then some snacks or dinner, breakfast, whatever. But spreading it out throughout the day does have really, really, really good noticeable benefit than just the large meals throughout the day. From that standpoint, there's also benefits obviously to insulin sensitivity, blood sugar control, having those smaller meals, not having 150 grams of carbs in one meal type thing, blah, blah, blah. Bunch of other stuff that we can cover in later videos. But as far as protein is concerned, muscle protein synthesis, that metabolic window, that's kind of the stuff that you need to know. While there, 100 grams at once does not have any, you'll still use it all, it just doesn't have any further benefit to muscle protein synthesis than having those small jumps throughout the day. Those small jumps are actually more beneficial because they can happen more often. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you. Click the link, share it, subscribe, click the bell, all that fun stuff. I'm new to YouTube, so we'll work on the outro, but I hope you enjoyed it, and leave in the comments kind of what you would like to learn about next, myths and stuff that you've heard, things like that. Check out my podcast, the Iron Mike Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram, Mike_fit by strength. Somewhat active on Twitter, mainly with sports though. Facebook, Mike Wollard Training. We're all over the place, and so I'd love to hear any feedback from you guys. I've ordered a lapel mic, so my audio quality is going to be better in the future ones. That'll be here Friday. And yeah, podcast goes up every Wednesday, so hope you check it out. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.